Imagine stepping into the gilded corridors of the Palace of Versailles in the late 17th century. Gold leaf catches the candlelight, perfume lingers in the air, and silk skirts rustle across polished marble. But beneath the splendor lies a secret most visitors would never guess. The women who floated through these halls like visions from a dream often hadn't touched warm water in months. Bathing in much of Europe was not only rare, it was actively discouraged. Doctors of the age believed warm water opened the pores, creating doorways for disease to seep into the body. And the church, with its deep suspicion of anything linked to pleasure, cast bathhouses as dens of sin and temptation. Water, the very essence of cleanliness, was treated with fear. For noble women in Versailles, bathing was an event so infrequent it bordered on ceremonial. A queen might wash her hands, face and neckline with a cloth moistened not with water but with vinegar, alcohol or even her own. On the rare occasion a full bath was ordered. It wasn't private or indulgent. The same tub of water would be used by multiple family members, starting with the most important man of the household. By the time a royal lady took her turn, the water was tepid, cloudy, and often filled with floating residue. Across the Channel in Tudor England, things were little better. Queen Elizabeth I was famously said to bathe only once a month, whether she needed it or not. In the smoky, draughty halls of her gowns, worn repeatedly without washing, were perfumed so heavily that the scent clung to the air long after she left the room. But perfume was no match for the realities of human sweat, trapped under layers of velvet and whalebone corsetry. In Mughal India, royal women had access to intricately carved marble baths and perfumed waters, but even here bathing was a luxury, not a routine. Women might soak themselves in rosewater or milk during festival seasons, but the daily dust, sweat, and grime of life in a sprawling palace still lingered between washes. For some, the belief persisted that too much bathing could upset the body's balance, leading to illness or infertility. So while portraits show queens and princesses as visions of purity, the truth was far more pungent. Silk and satin could hide a lot, but they could not hide everything. Step again into Versailles, a palace designed to awe and intimidate, and you'll notice what's missing: toilets. The most glittering palace in Europe, home to thousands of courtiers, had barely any functioning latrines. Instead, the court relied on chamber pots, porcelain, pewter or copper bowls tucked behind curtains, under beds or in closets. When nature called, a lady would use hers in semi-privacy, knowing an attendant would later carry it away or toss the contents out a window. Courtyards, gardens, and even palace staircases sometimes doubled as urinals, especially for men, but women too, found corners to relieve themselves when a pot was not at hand. The smell, in summer, was legendary. Elizabeth and England's royal palaces faced similar challenges. Court masques and feasts lasted for hours, with little opportunity to slip away discreetly. Noble women, dressed in farthingales and layered petticoats, often had to lift and bunch yards of fabric simply to squat over a pot. Servants would whisk away the waste afterward, or in crowded festivities, leave it aside until the event ended, the stench mingling with roasting meats and spiced wine. Travel east to Russia's Winter Palace in the 18th century, and the problem persisted despite the bitter cold. The massive halls, designed for grandeur rather than comfort, offered few privies. In winter, human waste thrown outside froze into heaps. In spring, thawing released waves of odor that swept through the palace courtyards. Within the building, chamber pots overflowed during banquets when the servants couldn't keep up with the demand. And toilet paper, forget it. Royal women wiped with cloth rags, straw or leaves, and washing afterward was minimal. Gloves, scented handkerchiefs, and liberal perfume were as much about masking odors as they were about style. It's little wonder that parasites, dysentery, and stomach complaints flourished in courts where the corridors doubled as latrines. If Versailles was the beating heart of European fashion, its pulse throbbed strongest in the wigs of the royal women. These were not simple hairpieces. They were feats of engineering. Piled high and powdered to perfection, they could reach over 2 feet in height, decorated with ribbons, jewels, feathers, and even miniature ships to commemorate naval victories. To create and maintain these towering styles, women used pomade made from animal fat, usually beef tallow, which gave the hair structure but also turned it into a greasy haven for lice. Hair was rarely washed. Wigs were kept intact for weeks at a time. Underneath, the scalp itched and crawled with insects. Special lice scratchers, delicate silver claws with long handles, allowed women to discreetly relieve the itch without ruining the style, even in the middle of a banquet. In Qing dynasty China, imperial women wore elaborate headpieces weighted with jade, gold, and flowers. The heavy crowns pressed against the scalp, trapping heat and sweat beneath layers of pinned hair. Hair washing was infrequent. partly because dismantling such an elaborate style was time-consuming, and partly due to beliefs about conserving bodily strength. As in Europe, lice and mites were constant companions. Russia's noble women, particularly those in the court of Catherine the Great, often wore kokoshniks, ornate headdresses over hair, padded with wool or cotton. These pads absorbed sweat and oils and were rarely laundered, creating perfect breeding grounds for pests. Removing them meant losing a carefully crafted style that might take hours to rebuild. So most women endured the itch in silence. To the outside eye, such hair was the pinnacle of sophistication. To the women wearing it, it was often a crown of discomfort, and sometimes a crawling crown. A royal feast was meant to impress groaning tables laden with roasted game, sugared fruits, pies, and fine wines. But behind the spectacle lay kitchens that were often as filthy as they were busy. In Versailles, the plumbing was so poor that raw sewage sometimes backed up into the cooking areas without refrigeration. Meat spoiled quickly, especially in summer. Flies and rats were common. The rush to feed hundreds of courtiers meant that food hygiene was an afterthought. Undercooked meats carried tapeworms, unwashed vegetables carried other parasites. Even the Sun King Louis XIV was said to have suffered from intestinal worms. In Russia's imperial kitchens, winter preserved some foods naturally, but spring thaw brought swarms of vermin. Meats were heavily salted to mask spoilage, while fish served in Lent could be days past its prime. Boiled or baked, it was still eaten better to risk illness than offend the Tsar or refuse a host's hospitality. Mughal India's royal kitchens overflowed with spices, rice, fruits and meats, but the same opulence brought risks. Sweetmeats and rice dishes, left uncovered for hours in the heat, attracted insects. Banquets sometimes lasted so long that by the final courses the food was already on the edge of turning for royal women refusing. Food was dangerous. It could be read as an insult or as political defiance. So they ate, smiled, and conversed, all the while risking the cramps and nausea that too often followed. In 17th century France, childbirth for a royal woman was never private. A queen's delivery was a matter of national concern, especially when the birth of a male heir could shape the future of the kingdom. To ensure no deception, births were conducted in the presence of courtiers, doctors, priests, and noble onlookers. When Queen Marie-Thérèse went into labour, her chamber became a theatre. The air was thick with heat and perfume. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, craning for a view. Privacy was impossible. Women laboured under layers of linen and lace, attended by physicians who had not washed their hands because the link between germs and infection was not yet understood. England's royal women fared no better. Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and later queens all gave birth surrounded by attendants and observers. Infections after delivery were common, killing mothers and infants alike. The survival of both was as much luck as it was skill. In Qing China's Forbidden City, imperial consorts gave birth under the supervision of eunuchs and palace physicians. While fewer outsiders were present, the pressure to produce a male heir was crushing. Complications were handled with traditional remedies, and if the mother died, her fate was mourned briefly before the court moved on. For royal women, childbirth was not just dangerous, it was public, politicized, and often traumatic. The risk of death from infection, blood loss, or exhaustion was constant. Yet the expectation remained: produce heirs and do so in a manner befitting the dignity of the crown, even if it meant enduring agony before an audience. From Versailles to the Forbidden City, from Hampton Court to the Winter Palace, royal women lived in a paradox, draped in luxury, yet mired in discomfort, indignity, and often filth. Bathing was feared, toilets were scarce, hair was alive with pests, feasts brought parasites, and childbirth unfolded before an audience. History remembers their jewels, their gowns, their painted smiles, but rarely the stench, the crawling lice, or the whispered prayers for a clean cup of water. Behind the pomp and pageantry lay a far messier truth. Royalty did not smell like roses.